Hey guys, happy Tuesday, welcome and welcome back to my channel. My name is Verenia, and in today's video, honestly, I feel like it's been a while since I've just sat down and had a chat with you guys, but today I want to talk about some of the financial moves I made as a woman of faith. Now, the reason why I wanted to do this video is because one of you guys actually commented on my videos asking me, could I just talk about, faith and finances and my personal journey and things like that. And so I thought that'd be a really good video topic, and I thought, why not film that today? So make sure you grab a tea and yeah, let's talk about it. Now, before I go into it, I do want to mention that I am hosting a live free masterclass at the end of March. So if you are interested in saving more money, how I've been able to save money so that it's allowed me to do things like quit my 9-to-5 job, then definitely make sure you join me on Tuesday the 29th of March. So all of the details and how you can register will be linked in the description below, but I will also link it up here for you so you can register and sign up, and I can't wait to see you there. So let's just maybe first talk about my personal finance journey and how that's maybe linked with my faith. So in case you didn't know, I am a Christian, and so a lot of the principles that are found in the Bible, that's really where I try to look at, especially when it comes to my personal finances. So it was basically around the end of 2018 when I decided to start learning about how people build wealth, how can I actually start to manage my money better. And funnily enough, at the same time, when I realized that I was in debt and that I really wanted to start paying things off, around that same time and the time that I now started to really focus on my personal finances was the exact same time that my pastor was talking about finances in our church. And so for me, it was a huge sign, from God for me, where it felt like God was talking to me about basically managing my money and becoming a steward of God's money, essentially. And actually before that, I want to backtrack a little bit because I'm not sure if I've shared this story before, but it's kind of linked to my car. So I decided before that I was going to get my car on finance because I wanted a whole new car. It was more from a self-conscious and image perspective because I saw people driving to work with these nice cars, and I was like, I don't want to be driving my old banger anymore. I want to get a nice car. Of course, I did not have money to pay for it in cash because I was living paycheck to paycheck, so I decided to finance a new car. And so the day before I was meant to go and pick up my old car, I ended up getting into a car accident. So that happened on the Friday, and I was supposed to go and pick up my car on the Saturday. And so my old car was completely written off. The person who actually crashed into my car, their insurance ended up paying out for my car. Honestly, it wasn't very much because it was such an old car. But during that time, there was something that switched in me. And for me, I think that was the beginning of the catalyst in terms of dealing with my finances, because I thought to myself, obviously I've already bought a new car on finance, but if I hadn't actually been thinking about getting a new car and all of a sudden someone's crashed into my car, would I have had enough money to pay to fix it? Actually, if this had happened, I would have no choice but to buy a car on finance because I wouldn't have had any money to buy another car. And the money that I got from the insurance company wouldn't have been enough to cover a new car. And for me, it felt like God was saying something. I didn't know what it was before, but then obviously now I feel like I do know what it was. But then after I bought the car, then there comes to a time where I'm now starting to think about my personal finances. I'm starting to watch these YouTube videos, starting to read books like Rich Dad Poor Dad. Again, I have a lot of my favorite personal finance books in the description below. But when I then started to read those books, things really started to change for me. As well as that, obviously seeing that my pastor was now talking about finances, that's really where I felt like God was talking to me. And so at that same point, I decided that I was actually going to dive more into the Bible in terms of what the Bible has to say about money, because I wanted to obviously make sure that I was still being a steward for God's money, because I see it as God's money, not personally my money. But I also wanted to make sure that the direction that I was going was the direction that God was pulling me into. And remember, if you're liking this video so far, then feel free to give me a thumbs up, as it really does help to support the channel. And I'm sure you already know it's free. And also at the time, I had been following people like Dave Ramsey, and Dave Ramsey is obviously a Christian as well. He has his own thoughts about, personal finance and his views of the world. So that's a totally different conversation. But there were some biblical principles that he was talking about. And so I decided that I also wanted to dive into the Bible and see what the Bible says about money. And I was actually really surprised at how much the Bible would talk about money. And for me, that actually gave me the confidence to also keep going in terms of actually managing my money and building wealth. Because one of the misconceptions that I always thought was that money was the root of all evil, because I think that's sometimes what you get told maybe from your parents or maybe from other generations. But then when I actually went into the Bible and looked for myself, and in case you want to know that verse, it's actually 1 Timothy 6:10 in the Bible, but it says in verse 10, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people craving money have wandered from the true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows." And so what I realized is that there was a difference between what money is and the love of money. So it wasn't that money was the root of all evil, but it was the love of money. And so that allowed me to really dive deeper into some of the other verses and really start to understand, okay, well, what does God say about money? And what does, other people say about money, people who build wealth, and what do I need to pull in order for me to actually think about building wealth in a way that's going to be good, but not focus on me just loving money, for example. So I want to talk about some verses that maybe have stood out to me that you may want to also have a look as well. And even if you're not a person of faith or you're not a Christian, I do actually think they're really good examples of how you can be able to manage your money and how you can actually use money as a tool to do good in this world. So one of the verses that I really like is in the book of Luke. So it's Luke 14:28-30. And it says, "Suppose one of you wants to build a tower, won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, 'This person began to build and wasn't able to finish.'" And for me, that really stood out because I was like, okay, so I need to know my numbers essentially, and I need to basically plan for some of these expenses, because what it's saying is you don't want to build a tower and not have enough money to complete it, right? So it's like me buying this house that I can't afford and then not having enough money to furnish it. And so when you dig deeper into it, it's almost thinking about how do you actually know your numbers? How do you plan to make sure that you're able to pay for certain expenses and that you have the money for it? So that was one of the verses that really stood out for me, which honestly I think is great. Another part of the Bible is in Genesis. So in Genesis 41, for example, from verse 34, it says, "Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food, all these good years that are coming up, and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine." And again, this for me is an example of actually preparing for your financial future and having things like an emergency fund so that you can prepare for those tough times. Let's say if a recession comes through, for example, and maybe you end up having to take a pay cut, maybe you end up losing your job. It's so important to really recognize and make sure that there are going to be tough times ahead, but there are things that you can do to make sure that you're in the best place possible, so that even if things like recessions happen, you at least have an emergency fund, for example. You have savings, you have investments to really give you the security during that time. And so for me, there are so many different verses. I mean, even Jesus spoke about money as well. If you look at the book of Matthew, chapter 25, there was the parable of the 3 servants. And so basically, just to cut the long story short, there was a master, he had 3 servants, and he gave them money to keep them, but also to grow that money as well. And so 2 of his servants, they actually ended up investing that money and they ended up getting a return. And so the master was really happy with it. But the last servant didn't do anything with the money. All he did is just kept the money aside. And so he didn't make any returns on it. He didn't get any interest. And the master was really angry about that. And he literally said, you could have at least, put it in the bank to get some interest on it rather than just letting it sit down. And so again, that reminds me of things like being able to not only save your money, but to also invest that money and make that money work for you. When I saw stories like this in the Bible, and that's not the only time where they talk about investing as well, I was just so overwhelmed by the amount of wisdom that I found when it comes to dealing with money, but also growing your money as well. And so that makes me not feel guilty about wanting to build wealth or wanting to build generational wealth in this case, because it talks about it in the Bible. But what I'm really conscious of is just just recognizing that that money is not mine, it is God's money. And so for me, I need to be a good steward of it, and I need to recognize, how am I using that money? Am I using it for good? So for example, am I actually giving back? And that is something that I actually started to do once I started focusing on my personal finances. I've never really used to give very much at all, but it was when I started thinking about how people build wealth, and a lot of people that do build wealth, they give a lot of that money away. And so I decided that I wanted to also build that habit, especially because I wanted to recognize that this isn't just my money. And so because of that, it's allowed me to think more abundantly. It still allowed me to pay off my debt in 18 months. It still allowed me to save over 40% of my income when I was working. And all of that was from me actually listening to God and realizing that if I can be content and learn how to manage and give the money I have, I can also fulfill certain financial goals too. And it's why even with my clients, I always encourage them to really start thinking about giving and becoming more abundant, because that is essentially what helped me pay off my debt. And my clients see the same thing. When they actually started giving more, they realized that they actually had more money than they needed, and they were also still able to reach those financial goals. But had I not actually just decided to look at the word and take that action, I don't think I would have been able to accomplish those things. And so for me, whether you're a person of faith or not, I think the biggest takeaway that I've always had is just always thinking about, okay, yes, I'm trying to build wealth, but what is that really for? If I'm using money as a tool, is it for me to do good in this world, or is it for me to just hoard everything and be greedy? The reason why I want to build wealth, for example, is not only for me to build generational wealth, but to also have that time freedom to be able to give back. And the reason, again, why I do these YouTube videos is because I felt like God was telling me that now that you've learned how to manage your own money and you've had success with it, you now need to give back and also help others do the same thing too. So yeah, I feel like I maybe rambled on a little bit, but I thought that this was quite a nice chit chat just to really dive a bit deeper into my faith, especially if you didn't know that I was a Christian. So I would love to know in the comments, you know, what are your experiences, whether you're a person of faith or not? What are you using this money to do, and how do you actually view money, and how does that link to your own personal beliefs? And if you did like this video, then remember to give me a thumbs up, and also a quick reminder that I am going to be doing a free live masterclass at the end of March, so make sure you have signed up if you haven't already. But I will see you guys on Friday.